All right, so tonight we are talking about why you need to be prepping for food shortages right now. And I'm going to go over a lot of different information and some news articles that have come out to kind of give us some ideas as to why there should be some urgency behind this and what we should be expecting. But in all honesty, a lot of the food shortages and a lot of the crisis that we're going to be expecting to see here will start popping up in 2023. So you still have time to prepare, but you should be aware of the idea that it's going to get worse next year than it is right now. So keep that in mind while you're moving forward. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. I'm seeing 5x5 in the chat. Harbor Prepper, thank you so much. USMC 0311, good to see you. Old Man Bones is here. Dave Sickles is here. We have Prepping by Faith. Hello. Tier Free is here as well. John P, good to see you. Steve F, thank you so much. Janet Nice, thank you for the 5x5. Grisio Nemo, 223. I prefer 556. Now, moving on from there, I want to get this started, and we're not going to just dwell on everything when it comes to what we can, look into when it comes to the food shortages themselves. But we're just going to talk about why this is an expectation, why we have to be prepared for it, and why food really needs to be a priority. And what I'll say to kind of start this conversation off with, and thank you, Hammer Arizona, I really appreciate that. What I'll say to start everything off with is that we need to be prioritizing food, but you really, if you can, in any way, shape, or form, should be trying to prioritize ways to produce it if you can. I know not everyone can. That's why I keep saying if you can. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad as if they don't have any options, if they don't have the ability to grow a garden or have chickens or something along those lines. But even in an apartment, you'd be surprised at least being able to produce something small within a windowsill or whatever, as long as you get creative. And they do have those kind of rotating racks now that have UV lights and are made for growing like microgreens and stuff like that. But whatever it is you can try to do to try to produce something that you can personally eat, right? Like, for example, I've got this pepper plant sitting on the windowsill in front of my kitchen sink right now. And you know what? At some point, because it's doing pretty good, I'm pretty proud of this pepper plant. But what I'm going to say is that at some point, I'll be able to eat a pepper off that plant. So that should be a goal everyone should be setting themselves with right now, which is eat something I grew at some point before 2023 or within the next year. Because honestly, things are going to get that tight. And I will be making some videos here in the future discussing some pieces of like equipment and gear and stuff that people tend to overlook or might not have. And they might not realize how valuable it can become when they need it, and they'll wish they had it, because it's not something you can just easily craft on your own or, use other pieces of equipment to accomplish the same goal. So good to see everybody. Hey, the baby car, good to see you. Alias is here. I appreciate that. Jimmy Hat, good to see you. Now, what I wanted to bring up in this conversation is the fact that there's a lot of things we're being told right now that show us just why this is so important. So let's go ahead and start with the first article we're going to discuss tonight, which is what Oklahoma is talking about, okay? So basically, we have ranchers in Oklahoma who are stating just at least their opinion when it comes to what they can expect, okay? And they're saying that this is something they should, consider a possibility, all right? And honestly, that's the most concerning part, because these are people who have an investment in the game. These are people who, grow or raise cattle in order to make a profit and in order to move forward in their own business. So they're not just putting this out there because they want to. They're trying to let everybody know exactly what's happening, all right? So basically, at the end of the day, this article is discussing why we should expect ground beef and just beef prices in general to hit extraordinary numbers by next year, okay? So the whole state of Oklahoma is currently classified in a state of drought. Some areas are considered abnormally dry, while others are listed as experiencing extreme drought status. But that's not painting the full picture that is happening across the entire beef industry right now, okay? And what they allude to and what they discuss within this article is that in previous droughts and in previous dry spells, other states were able to pick up some of the slack when it came to supporting each other in the agricultural industry to keep things moving forward. So if Oklahoma was having issues with the drought, well, then other states like Texas and Nebraska were able to start growing all the hay and all the feed and everything else that they needed in order to keep the livestock growing and fed. And so they were able to supplement each other in order to get past some of these problems. The issue right now is that the drought is affecting so many states and so much of the country that they're not able to help supplement each other because nobody really necessarily has abundance. And that's where a lot of our problems are coming from, is that the abundance that we've relied on for so long is no longer there. There's not as much of a buffer as there used to be. So when any little issue occurs, we have these big problems that come out of it, which we used to be able to kind of just skate right over because, well, we have some extra and we have the ability to grow over here instead of here, so no big deal. But right now, with the way the drought is going, everybody's trying to get what they can, and they're all fighting for the same limited resources, okay? So here's where things get really interesting, and this is what you should really be keeping in mind, especially when it comes to not just food shortages, because obviously we know agriculture is going to be affected by the weather as well as everything else happening with the economy, the price of fertilizer, and all those things combined. But the biggest thing is that maybe there will be food, but can you afford it? Will you be able to actually access food? Will you be able to have the food you need to eat in a healthy way? I mean, I struggle eating healthy right now while I'm trying to maintain a certain diet and maintain a level of activity that I'm, kind of being strict about. And it's getting more and more difficult. Every single time I go to the grocery store, I go past the meat aisle and I wonder what I'm really going to do about it this week, right? So if it costs $200 to feed and raise a cow in 2021 to a market value of $600, imagine what the value will have to be when 2022's herds hit the same market seeking the same profit margin. And before you get all crazy and say, well, why do they need to make so much money on every cow? They have a business to run. If they don't succeed, they will close down their business, and then that'll be that much less cattle that's available to everyone. So before you get a little bit too ahead of yourself getting upset that these farmers are trying to make a profit, they literally have to, or else they won't be farmers anymore, and then you will have that much less food. So yes, they have to make a profit. If it costs $400 to feed and raise that same cow, it'll need to fetch a finished price and a fair comparison, because each farm and ranch in America is a small business that must profit to survive or cease to exist, okay? So you can understand why this is becoming so expensive. And there are farmers in Oklahoma and beef producers who are literally saying that the possibility of cheap ground beef could eventually hit $50 a pound is a reality. $50 a pound. Now, obviously, this is a little bit, let's just say, extreme, right? But at the same time, when these beef producers are putting this out there, it's not because they're trying to, get social media status. They're not trying to get people riled up to buy beef. They're not using it as some kind of a marketing tool to push more beef sales, because, selling beef is really not that hard to do. But when it's that expensive, it will be increasingly hard to do, right? People can't buy it if they can't afford it. So they're putting this out there because they honestly believe this is a possibility if things don't get better. So now this is a situation where if things do improve, we might not ever see that. But if we ever were to see that, could you imagine what those ramifications would be? How would people get by when beef prices are that high? And now another thing about this article that I appreciated is the fact that they talk about this common answer you see, which is, well, the answer won't be, we'll just switch to chicken. Those prices are steadily climbing too. And let's not get depressed together thinking about bacon and pork loin, right? But this is true. A lot of people think you can just pivot to a different resource in order to break apart some of the cost increases, right? But that's just not going to work in the current environment. The reason why beef is becoming so expensive, the reason why these cattle ranchers are struggling is nationwide. So it's affecting other farmers and other agricultural departments and industries, not just cattle and beef, right? So that's the first thing we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to roll right into the next one here, but I do want to see what you guys are talking about here in the chat for a minute. Mary Jane says it's time to buy a half of beef. And, I agree. I think being able to store things now will pay off later, because at the end of the day, the prices you're getting right now are much better than what you'll probably see in the near future. And every so often at my grocery store, they'll have beef on sale, ground beef, and it'll be $2.98 a pound. And I grab up a bunch while I can, because honestly, $3 a pound is going to be unheard of at some point in time here, especially by next year. And the big thing we all have to keep in mind is that these agricultural impacts aren't immediately felt. They're not. We have to wait for them to actually be able to come to fruition. We have to wait for them to actually occur. So yes, we're being told these things are happening now, and then people will use normalcy bias and their justification bias and go to the store and say, I don't know what Magic's talking about. There's plenty of beef and it's not that expensive. But the thing is I'm talking about next year because of what's happening right now. I mean, cattle takes time to raise. Cows have to grow. They don't just immediately become available to slaughter the second they're born. So you have to understand that this is a timely process. This all is going to take time before we're going to see the real ramifications of these issues we're seeing right now. Utah Mike, are crickets keto? I believe so. And luckily, my entire property is just covered in grasshoppers. So I will be able to eat very well no matter what the situation for at least quite some time. Now, once winter comes and everything outside dies, and I mean everything, life might be a little bit more peaceful, but not as abundant. So, I have things to consider in that regard. Nicholas Azalona says, how concerned are you about food riots with food shortages next year? I'm worried that things will get bad. I have no desire to get shot again. All right. Well, first off, I hope you don't get shot again, and I wish you never got shot before. But second off, I think food drives people to a different level of desperation. And I think food is the one thing that will take somebody who's generally a good person and move them to do something terrible, because it's not about them. It's about who relies on them. It's about who depends on them. And the willingness for a parent to do what they have to do to make sure their child is fed is something that you don't want to mess with. So I am concerned about that, because once people really start feeling the burn of actual hunger, our society is not prepared for that. Our society is not hardened to, times of famine or times of hunger or even times of just great duress. So honestly, I think that is a reasonable concern to have. And if everyone wants to, ask me like, well, why do you focus on firearms so much? Why are you always worried about self-defense and those types of scenarios? Well, first off, I enjoy it. It's a passion. So it's just part of the deal. But second off, it's because people will get inherently dangerous during times of desperation. And in fact, the longer this whole crisis goes on for, and the more desperate people become, the more and more dangerous society tends to become. And I think we can all see that happening right now in our major cities. I mean, look what's happening in places like Memphis, Tennessee right now, where you're having live stream events that are atrocious. And then you're having kidnappings in broad daylight and all kinds of stuff. This stuff happens more and more the worse things get. So yes, I do consider myself a little bit invested in the sense of self-preservation, and I don't apologize for it. Now, let's go ahead and, my nephew came and visited me from Germany. Their beef is $20 a pound. And see, that's a great thing to bring up, Jane Williams, because honestly, we can see what's happening in other parts of the world and understand that America will always do their best to be the last country to be affected by these things in that manner. Okay, so we will undercut and we will do whatever we got to do to keep everybody rolling forward and keep this idea that everything's fine for as long as possible, which is another reminder. They won't tell you it's not fine until it's already not fine. So I'm always keeping that in mind as well. So what else is going on? Well, let's talk about the fact that, okay, so if beef hits $50 a pound, don't worry, we'll move to chicken and turkey, right? And that article said, like, that's flawed logic. Don't base anything on that. So let's talk about that and why that's flawed logic right now, okay? So here we have bird flu. This is from ABC News. Bird flu forces egg farm to euthanize 3 million chickens. This happened September 7th. This is all recent stuff. This is not stuff that's just happening, years ago that we're talking about again. This is happening right now, okay? An outbreak of bird flu that has led to the deaths of 43 million chickens and turkeys this year across the U.S. has been found at a giant egg-laying operation in Ohio, state and federal agriculture officials said on Wednesday. All right, the case confirmed over the weekend in Ohio's Defiance County has affected roughly 3 million chickens, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The egg-laying farm has started euthanizing all of its flocks, said Dennis Summers, the state's veterinarian. So understand that's 3 million egg-laying chickens that are suddenly off the table, right? Now, I think chickens, and this is something I don't have yet, okay? Listen, I have property and I have the ability to do things that a lot of people don't have the ability to do. I am working on establishing all of those things, but everything takes time, organization, and resources in general. So give me some time. I promise you I'm working on it, and I'm not just telling you guys to do things that I'm not going to do. Very soon here, I will have livestock animals and I will have chickens. But obviously, things need to be put into place to accommodate those animals, especially in an environment that becomes negative 30 degrees on a regular basis during the winter. That being said, I think chickens is a great idea for anybody to get if they have the ability to, because eggs are amazing when it comes to protein and it just comes to overall caloric intake, and the fact that they are regularly produced is a good option to have. And not to mention chickens themselves are, of course, a great source of protein. But this is what's happening. 3 million chickens are off the table, and 43 million chickens and turkeys this year have been removed from the pool due to bird flu. So you can't just pivot from one to the next. The thing that we have to kind of wake up and realize as Americans and as preppers and as people of modern Western society that think everything's going to be fine constantly and wonder why anybody would ever prepare and why anyone gets concerned about these types of things. The thing we have to keep in mind is the fact that it's not one little thing that affects everybody, right? It's all these little things that pile up on each other and eventually create a problem that we can't necessarily avoid. Like I said before, in the past with droughts and stuff, farms will rely on other regions to supply them with their needs. So, oh, hey, we're in a drought, but luckily Nebraska is sending feed. Okay, good to go. Well, now Nebraska can't grow any feed either. So who's going to send the feed? And now everybody, including Nebraska, is looking for feed. And now that supply that used to be a lot larger is much smaller because everybody needs it. So you see how these things just kind of roll on top of each other. And that's an issue we have to keep in mind. And in that same vein, discussing bird flu and everything else regarding that, let's just talk about Thanksgiving. So turkey prices are surging ahead of Thanksgiving due to disease. So this is not just chickens, it's also turkeys. Okay, this is September 9th, all right? This is like just now. We're not just talking about things from last year or anything like that, all right? So Americans are paying more than ever for turkey as a contagious virus leads to the destruction of millions of birds. We're still talking millions of birds. We're not talking about, 10 over here and 5 over here and this little farm there. No, this is millions of birds. The highly pathogenic avian influenza virus is helping drive the price of turkey, specifically white boneless breast meat, to record highs, even as the hottest inflation in 40 years has cooled in some recent months. Yeah, sure, whatever you say, very optimistic CBS News. That may make the Thanksgiving meal even pricier this year. Now, this is all in the presentation of Thanksgiving, right? Oh, no, the one time you buy a turkey. But understand that turkey in general is used in a lot of different products, and turkey is a staple as a lunch meat and a million other things, right? And at the end of the day, if one thing is more expensive, other things become more expensive. And this is just another issue that we can't avoid because it's compounding with the others. So, okay, beef's too expensive. What about chicken? Oh, whoops, 3 million chickens gone. Oh, well, let's go to turkey because, they're bigger anyway. Millions are gone over there too. So, and this article has the same exact repeat when it comes to the information regarding 44 million turkeys, chickens, ducks, and other birds have died this year, okay, across 39 states. I mean, that's big, okay? And this is all happening just this past Wednesday at a commercial turkey meat facility in Minnesota's Morrison County. They had 50,000 birds lost, all right? So we can't just pivot away from this. This is all occurring and it's all affecting different parts of the agricultural industry. And there's not just another option that makes it better. Unless you want to incorporate some alternative things like crickets, right? I don't know, humans. There's a lot of talk about that now, isn't there? And it's unfortunate that it really seems like that's where some people's minds are immediately going, right? Well, obviously the answer is right in front of our eyes. Well, I don't agree with that answer, and I will not partake, but you do what you need to do. And obviously in a survival situation, would I eat some bugs if I had to? Of course, okay? We're talking survival. But in general everyday life, I'm just not going to do that. So I'm going to find other alternative ways, which means becoming more self-sufficient, more self-reliant, and having ways to produce your own food in case at some point in time, the only thing you're offered is bug-based, plant-based, or who knows what else based products, okay? Everything here is very based. I just want to throw that out there. Mark Fallows, thank you so much. And 2020 Vision team, thank you as well. Honestly, 2020 Vision sounded much better before the actual year 2020, which now sounds almost nefarious now, doesn't it? All right, so In the Woods says, we give folks at church about 6 to 8 dozen a week. I assume we're talking about eggs, and that's amazing, And I remember back when I lived in California up in the mountains, there was a lady just down the street who was selling eggs every single day. It wasn't like she just ran out of eggs at any point. I mean, she literally had eggs for sale every single day. So it's just a really good product to be able to produce yourself if you can. So just keep that in mind. I think that self-production when it comes to caloric intake is going to be the future. And I wouldn't be surprised that if, let's say, things improve, and let's say that there's somehow a shift in mentality of authoritarianism where people decide, yes, we want you to actually be comfortable and do well. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised if there'd be a push, the same way as we're seeing for green energy right now, but a push in the future for people to actually produce their own food. So, indoor greenhouses, and everybody gets a tax deduction for how many chickens they have, or something like that. But that would take a huge shift in the sense of how people think right now based on what we should be able to do or not do for ourselves. Right now, the opinion would generally be, well, don't worry about it. Just stay in your apartment and we'll Uber Eats you the food that you need to survive. And you're going to like it because it's the only thing available, right? And I don't like that idea. Prepper Now, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Chief Prepper, I see you're here. Hello as well. I did want to say I saw Charlie Tuna talking earlier about weight loss and getting into physical fitness and trying to get back into shape and whatnot. And I appreciate that. And I support you for that. And I think that that's something everybody could do. And no matter how good a shape you are, you can always keep working on it because, I mean, cardio is cardio, right? It's the worst thing you can possibly do, but it's a necessity in many ways. At the end of the day, I think that's a great free prep that a lot of us could do more of, and it doesn't cost any money. So just keep that in mind. I appreciate that you took, I guess, notes or whatever it is you said to me, Charlie Tuna, about that. But I really support what you're doing, and I'm really proud of you. So thanks for letting everybody know about your progress there. And I think that's a great idea and a great plan. So this drought is causing a lot of the problems. Now, the Drought Monitor, which is right here, this was released on September 8th. Okay, so I'm sure an update is on its way. But at the end of the day, what you can see here using this drought map, and look, we're not here to discuss the nuances of climate change or any of that kind of stuff. This is just the weather right now. And so we have to adapt to it. Okay, when things get hot, we have to wear t-shirts, and when things get cold, we put on sweaters. So right now we're talking about how there's no rain. And where there's no rain is a huge part of where our agriculture comes from. And in case a lot of people don't know this, because I will tell you, a lot of people who I've met over the years said, "Oh, you live in California, man. You must know somebody famous," or "Oh, how's the beach?" Okay, California's huge, and it's one of the largest agricultural producers in the world. So it is a big deal that California is in such a bad drought. And of course, their water management, and everything else they do in the state politically is probably a big part of their issue, just because they're really bad at just about everything when it comes to management. But at the end of the day, the weather itself is saying that there's no rain, and therefore we're not getting a good crop yield from California, and we're not getting a good crop yield from a lot of states. As you can see here, the Southwest is very dry, the Midwest is very dry, and obviously where the breadbasket would usually be considered is looking pretty bad. And in fact, I mean, think about where the Dust Bowl was during the Great Depression, and you can kind of see the correlation here as to why this is such an issue. Okay, so understand that this is affecting a huge part of the country. And it's not just the United States. This drought is going on all over the place. So are we in a climate shift? Possibly. At the end of the day, does it matter? No, what really matters is, am I going to eat? Am I going to have food next year? Am I going to be able to afford it next year? That's the things you really need to focus on. So when you get upset about someone discussing climate or whatever else, keep in mind that you really should be thinking about, will this affect my ability to be prepared? Will this affect my ability to have a quality of life? That's all that should really matter at the end of the day. We have to really look inwardly and start taking care of ourselves and our families before we get upset about somebody's ideology surrounding this or that. Got to look into what is really happening and just say, okay, this is happening. How do I adapt to it and overcome it? All right. Now, why is this drought such an issue? Well, of course, the drought is causing problems all over the place, including, well, strangely enough, California. Okay. Now, California rice industry takes a hit as drought drags on. Now, this is going to be an interesting part of this conversation because this whole rice thing has a weird twist to it. Okay, so, hold on, don't worry. There's a lot of other reasons why this rice thing's not a big deal, but I'll show you why this is problematic and how the media is either, I don't know, missing the big picture or purposely trying to make sure everybody stays calm. Because in my opinion, what I'm reading is in direct opposition to what is being written. I don't know what else to say about it, but that's just how it feels. So nearly half of California's rice fields are empty due to the drought, according to Aaron Smith, professor of agricultural economics at UC Davis. All right, so the latest drought monitor released Thursday shows slight relief in the Southern California desert, but no change elsewhere. Over 40% of the state is an extreme drought and 17% is an exceptional drought, the highest rating given out. With record heat expected over the Labor Day weekend and beyond, the state will be roasting in the sun, and it is possible more of California dives deeper into drought with the wet season still many weeks away, okay? And if you've never been in like Central California, it's true. It rains in the winter and not once in the summer. It's extremely dry for the entirety of the summer, and it's why the fires are so rampant and everything else. Now, here's the problem. Rice requires a ton of water, okay? A lot of water. And rice is obviously a big deal, but I am trying to get to the point of the article here where we need to be a little bit skeptical about the purpose of it, okay? So let's just go through a couple parts of it. A lack of water has greatly harmed California's agriculture industry, specifically rice farmers. Rice production is a heavy water consumer, being the fourth largest water-consuming crop in California, according to the Department of Water Resources, right? Aaron Smith, professor of agricultural economics at UC Davis, said the state was only able to plant 55% of the amount of fields as it planned due to a lack of water. However, eastern counties were less impacted than western ones, while Butte County only lost 17% due to its groundwater resources. Colusa County lost 84% of its rice acreage, and Glenn County lost 75%. Okay, so as you can see, this is also just all put into proportion. So when you say 40% of rice is not being planted, well, in some areas, it's upwards of 75%. In some areas, it's 84%. Okay, so this then affects those local economies extremely hard. So it doesn't just happen at the grocery store for you and me. It happens to people who live in those towns and in those counties, and agricultural counties and towns that rely on farming as their main economic, structure. They struggle a lot when these kinds of yields start occurring. Okay. Now, let's see. I'm trying to find the part that I wanted to. Here we go. Okay, this is what I wanted to talk about. Despite the loss in planted acres, he doesn't expect the lack of rice production to raise prices much. Okay, understand that this is going to be a recurring theme that I think we are going to find isn't necessarily accurate. The rice we grow in California is mostly a short grain rice that's used in sushi and a lot of sort of similar dishes like that. There's going to be a less than normal amount of rice produced in California, but we can import that from other countries. Okay, so we can import it from other countries. Don't worry about it because we can always get more. Right? Do you see the reoccurring theme here that we don't have to concern ourselves with this because we can always get more? Yet we have Oklahoma cattle ranchers saying, well, we can't get feed because of this drought's affecting these other states just like it's affecting us. So now we're no longer able to outsource the things we used to be able to outsource when we were in struggling times. And now we have these articles saying, it's fine, we'll just import it, right? This is interesting. And I am going to try to bring this full circle here for you in just a minute. Now, hey, what's up, Roaming Prepper? Good to see you. ABC Patriot is here as well. Six Gun Miller, hello. JJ, good to see you too. Let's see. Brandon Rivera, good to see you as well. Now, I'm trying to see if there's anything in the chat. If you guys have any questions or anything, let me know. Minuteman69 says, Walmart had no big bags of rice tonight. Biggest was 5 pounds. And honestly, that does happen quite often. I think people are catching on to long grain white rice as being a good thing to store away for the long term. But I will say when I go to my Walmart, I always kind of check just to kind of see what's there. And I mean, last time I went there was only the 1 20-pound bag of rice. So I picked it up. But a lot of times that's not there anymore. So I will admit that seems to be an issue. Durgan says, Arkansas is where Riceland rice is based. They do export a lot of their production, though. And that's true. And in that article, they actually talk about how Arkansas is the first largest rice producer and California is the second. So thanks for bringing that up as well. But let's talk about why this doesn't work the way that they're saying, because they're just going to import the rice. So don't worry about it. All we're really, missing out on is like sushi rice and stuff like that. So that's all stuff we don't need necessarily. It's just, it's luxury rice basically, right? I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to allude to. But let's talk about another country. China's drought unlikely to unsettle global rice markets. So amazingly, and like I said, this is Wednesday, September 7th. So this is not, old news. But amazingly, China's in a drought right now, and they can't grow rice either. But somehow that's not going to raise prices either. So California, don't worry about the prices. China, don't worry about the prices. It's because, we're just going to import it, right? So a potential drop in China's rice output this year resulting from recent adverse weather conditions in the Yangtze River region is unlikely to drive major volatility in global rice prices, says Fitch Ratings. China's import needs could rise on reduced domestic yields, but its abundant rice reserves and the government's tolerance for moderate fluctuations in reserve levels should help limit the increase. Now, the big takeaway from this part of the article is China's import needs could rise, okay, on reduced domestic yields. So California says, don't worry, we'll just import it. China says, don't worry, we're just going to import it. Okay, who's going to make the rice at some point? And this is why you really need to be paying attention to what's happening right now, because in 2023, you're going to be seeing what you can almost call like a food war going on in the sense of like a bidding war. If everybody needs to import rice, the rice that is available will become extremely expensive, and the people with the most buying power will probably be able to acquire it. And I don't know who has more buying power, China or California. I mean, honestly, California is a huge economy, but what I will say is that I likely assume China might be able to get that rice beforehand. So these are all considerations you need to make. This is just what's happening right now. And the fact that we are being told that the number one solution to this issue is import. Well, what happens when everybody is affected the same way as China and California? And weird enough, they try to tell us about how that works, right? So let's go ahead and talk about that because it's funny how this whole thing just keeps being very positive, which makes you wonder what the whole purpose of it is. If there's nothing to worry about, why are we talking about it so much? I don't know. It just seems like this recurring theme just keeps coming around. Let's see here. The Rio 7018 says, make sure it's not plastic rice. I agree. I think that's a good idea. And in fact, it would be easy to just fill bags with little beads of plastic and say, here you go. This is the rice you wanted, right? I mean, look at styrofoam. I mean, you can basically eat that stuff in many ways before you would notice that maybe it's not supposed to be eaten. So, yeah, I think things could definitely happen like that, right? Don't eat styrofoam. I didn't say that. You didn't hear it here. Come on, people. I shouldn't have to say that. Anyway, let's see. Nicholas Azalona asks, what would I expect the 2023 shortages to be compared to this year already being difficult? And that's what the whole point of this conversation. They're going to be worse. And it's not just about the shortage. And that's something that I think we need to kind of be a little bit more adamant about. I'm not just trying to tell you about the shortage necessarily. I'm trying to tell you about the fact that our supply will be shorted. We will have a shortage on a personal level because we can't afford what is available. And so with supply and demand, all of the people who are, middle class and below will be buying less food because they can't afford the food that is now in the store. The people who are rich and wealthy will still be able to buy whatever they want. So that might not necessarily fit the bill of an extreme food shortage, like a food shortage where there's nothing on the shelf. There might be food on the shelf, but can you and I afford it? Can I buy the same amount of groceries I usually need in order to feed my family on a regular basis with the level of nutrition that I prefer to feed them with? Those are things you have to keep in mind. So if you can't do that, now you are experiencing a personal food shortage. It's no longer about, well, there's food. Okay, but can I buy it? If I can't buy it, then I don't have the food, so there's no food. So you have to really look at it on more of a personal level, because I think people will constantly say that in the chat. They'll say it in the comments. They'll say it all over the prepper community. Well, what food shortage? I went to the grocery store today and there was stuff on the shelf. Okay, great. But at some point, if there's stuff on the shelf that you can't buy because it's too expensive, then does it matter if it's on the shelf if you can't take it home? That's what you really need to be thinking about right now. Okay. So, let's see. Dale Cobb, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining the membership. And yeah, I mean, that's awesome. Let's see here. So I think I need a sip of coffee, which is also very expensive, by the way, because this conversation is rolling right into the next thing. Hey, Hammer, Arizona. Glad you got the fishing kit. That is awesome. I'm glad it made it there. And I just thought it was cool. And it's from another YouTuber, Rule the Wasteland. So I thought it was just something that would be kind of neat, especially with you being, involved with the preparedness community. So I'm glad you like it. That's awesome. I appreciate your support. So let's go to, let's see. Ample world rice supplies to cushion impact of Pakistan and China crop losses. So now you understand why we should be preparing, because the media is never going to tell you there's a problem until that problem is already in front of your eyes. Until you're at the store wondering why you can't afford it anymore, then you'll start getting the news story about things are just really unaffordable suddenly, huh? So look, ample world rice supplies to cushion the impact of Pakistan and China crop losses. So now it's not just China, it's also Pakistan. But don't worry, there's an ample world rice supply. Although we even have California not being able to grow rice. No, everybody's having an issue growing rice. This ample supply will only last so long until it's no longer ample. And that's why, this is an interesting thing that they're trying to put out in all these different articles, is that don't worry, we'll just get it from somewhere else. They're going to constantly get it from somewhere else until there's nowhere else to get it from. And that's really what's concerning me, is that this is all a long process. that we probably won't see the ramifications of until next year. But by knowing that this is happening, we can now be buying rice or whatever other food storage products you want and feel better about the fact that what we're buying now is still reasonably affordable compared to what we can expect. Okay. Heat and flood damage in key parts of China and Pakistan. Pakistan could lose 1/10 of the rice output to floods. Bangladesh buys more rice to fill domestic shortfall. You see this recurring theme. Everybody's just buying it from somewhere else. The more this is happening, the more expensive rice becomes. How come every time in these articles they talk about how this probably won't affect the price because there's an ample supply? Well, if there's such an ample supply that they're having to buy it because they have to refill their domestic shortfall, that rice will become inherently more expensive just based on basic economic principles, not even on the fact that there's not enough. There is currently more demand because California, China, and Pakistan are all outsourcing rice now that they used to grow domestically. So how are you expecting to keep the prices down when these major players in the rice game are having to buy their rice instead of grow it? That's what I don't understand in the sense of why they're trying to put this cherry on top of the articles. Clearly, rice is going to get more expensive. Clearly, food in general is becoming more expensive, but they keep letting us know why it's not because there's just so much of it, right? So abundant rice supplies and key exporters may largely offset an unexpected an expected drop in output after floods in Pakistan and severe heat wave in China damaged crops, capping any gains in prices from steady Asian demand. Pakistan, the world's 4th largest rice exporter, by the way, not just some small country when it comes to making rice, right? 4th largest rice exporter suffered extensive damage to agriculture, including rice, as floods ravaged large swath of its farmland, with extremely high temperatures in parts of China at the end of August have taken a toll on rice output in the world's biggest importer of the staple. You see what I'm getting to here, right? I assume everybody's on the same page right now, okay? However, global rice stockpiles, we got stockpiles. Don't you worry about that. Global rice stockpiles are pretty comfortable, and an improving Indian crop outlook should quell any supply concerns and limit any price increases from recent strong demand that has emerged from Bangladesh, said a Singapore-based trader at one of the world's top rice trading companies. See how all of this is being looked at through a singular lens. Oh, Bangladesh. Oh, Pakistan. Don't worry, the rice will be fine because Pakistan will be able to get it from somewhere, right? But then you go over to the other article and you say, well, China, I mean, I know they produce a lot of rice, but China, yeah, but they'll get it from somewhere. So, there's enough rice from other places that'll be fine. Well, California, yeah, they can't really grow rice right now, but they're getting it from somewhere else. And since there's so much rice everywhere, it probably won't cost more. This reoccurring theme, it should tell you exactly what you need to know. Basic economics is all we need to understand at this point in time to understand how difficult the situation ahead really is going to be. And if you understand basic economics, none of what we're being told makes sense based on the fact that everybody's saying the same thing, but getting their rice from somewhere else. So apparently none of these articles were able to link up with each other and talk about how each country is actually experiencing the same thing and trying to conduct business in the same way. But if they did, they would understand that this is going to probably make prices go up. All right. So I hope we're all on the same page here. I do want to say, thanks for becoming a member, Officer 47. I appreciate it. Let's see here. I've also got another Mark Carlson. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Savage Lee is here. Good to see you. Kill It and Grill It is here as well. And Kill It and Grill It says it's an ample supply until it's not. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. It's interesting that they're trying to put everything out there as stockpiles and ample and everything, but then everyone is having the same problem and having to get rice from these other places. And usually Pakistan would probably turn to China and get rice, but they can't do that right now. So, and then China would probably turn to India and get rice, and then California would turn to China. But you can see how all this isn't going to necessarily pan out the way we're being told. Just something I wanted to go ahead and bring up. Now, I will say it does seem that Pakistan is understanding of how dire the situation is becoming. So maybe they're a little bit more aware of how difficult this can be. President for crop insurance system to protect farmers against crop failure, calamity-induced losses. Okay, so this is September 12th. All right, so this is literally today. President Dr. Arif Alvi on Monday called for a user-friendly crop insurance system to protect farmers against a crop failure and the losses caused by man-made or natural calamities, especially in the wake of current global warming-induced super floods in Pakistan. Now, of course, they had to throw in the global warming-induced because, of course, they can prove that regardless of how you feel about it. Sometimes floods just happen, all right? Pretty sure, they weren't necessarily talking about global warming back when Noah built an ark and whatnot, right? So, and I'm not trying to get biblical here. I just think that's the best reference for a flood that we have. Either way, what I'm trying to say is that Pakistan has taken this very seriously to the point where they're trying to create an insurance system to protect farmers all the way down to like the micro level, okay? President Albi asked the insurance sector and other stakeholders to particularly focus on 93% of farmers in Pakistan who had land holdings of 12.5 acres or less while introducing their insurance products. So I think that Pakistan, at least in the sense of having an idea of how important it is to keep their population fed, might be moving forward towards something that they need to do, or else they're worried about what the future will look like. Anytime the government starts spending money on the little guy, it should probably concern you to a degree, because a 12.5 acre farm can definitely produce some food, but it's definitely not a large farm by any means at that size. Yet they are still prioritizing all these small farms because they know that, one, the people at those size of farms are helping feed themselves as well as probably members of their community. And two, if they don't make enough food to support the large population they have within Pakistan, they will have a lot of problems that are much more difficult to deal with than floods, right? So we know people become desperate and dangerous when they're hungry, and you don't want an entire population to become that overnight. And you know who usually gets the finger pointed at them when people start to starve and quality of life goes down and people get desperate and angry? They usually look to those who are in charge. So I have a feeling that they're taking this very seriously and that they're very concerned about what crop output is going to look like in the near future. So keep all this in mind, because, I mean, I'm not saying Pakistan does everything right. I'm just saying that they're approaching it from the stance of making it a priority, which should give you some inclination as to why this is such a big deal, okay? Let's see here. House of Lamar just says, preppers. And I like that about you, okay? And then let's see. Marsuck Raider, now is the time to learn the things you don't know, like processing your own game. And I think that's a great idea. And, I don't have a lot of experience with processing game. I haven't ever had the chance to field dress or process any large game, in all honesty. Birds and stuff like that, sure. But, I'm still working on moving forward in that department. Where I live in North Dakota, you do have to do a lottery to get a deer tag. So there's been some things that kind of slowed me down in that department. But I do have good friends in this community and good people who have supported me and helped me with other projects that are more than willing to take me out. Not only hunting, but show me the ropes when it comes to field dressing and game, processing and everything related to it. So, yes, I agree that those skills are important, and I think it's a good idea. Now, and Six Gun Miller says, don't eat deer corn. Yeah, there's definitely some issues when it comes to deer corn. So, but there is some weird, feed and grain that you could technically store away and use if needed. And one thing that I'll be talking about on the channel here in the near future is maybe the necessity for a mill, because a lot of people actually don't have one. And it is interesting how useful that could become in a post-SHTF environment, and why being able to mill your grains could be a game changer. So just throwing that out there as a possibility here in the future. Now, let's go ahead and talk about another big issue that's coming our way that we really need to keep an eye on, especially here in the United States, okay? Let's talk about the railroad strike, okay? So we all know that this is on the books, okay? And I have had somebody on my Instagram actually come through and start talking to me about these railroad strikes and kind of letting me know some inside information regarding their expectations surrounding it and the fact that it will be a big deal if it goes through. So now this will technically be allowed to start on Friday after a cool down period. And the unions, 8 out of 12, have reached an agreement to basically get to the point of saying that we are going to have to strike, right? So we're basically seeing that if there's no ratification unless the quality of life issues include vacation, sick days, and attendance are addressed, okay? And basically 40% of the nation's long-distance trade moves by rails, and idling of 7,000 trains daily would trigger retail product shortages and widespread manufacturing shutdowns. And I can tell you that most of the trains I see going through my area that you guys occasionally hear on my videos, because nothing stops sound in North Dakota. That train is not as close as it sounds, I guarantee you. But there's no trees or anything to stop that horn from coming to my house. So, but most of the trains I see are moving grain, are moving food products. They're not necessarily moving, Amazon, shipping containers from China. So these are things you guys have to keep in mind. Like food is moved by train. And this is another thing that can happen in the near future that can easily spike prices when it comes to food and everything else. Okay, so this is a big one to watch out for. It might not happen, so don't get too worked up about it, but expect it to happen so that you can adapt to it if it does, because you didn't get caught off guard. This would basically create a strike, and we know what that looks like. People stop working for a certain amount of time, which means the supply chain suffers further for that amount of time. The only issue and the only major concern I have about this situation is that the supply chain can't really handle a lot more strain. The supply chain is already on its last thread in many ways. So any additional factors that hurt the supply chain are really hurting the supply chain. So honestly, be smart about what to expect after the 16th. And my expectation, even though it might be less probable, I'm just going to expect this strike to happen. And so I might go get a couple extra supplies or whatever else you want to call it this week before the 16th. And then if nothing happens, that still doesn't hurt me because, I'm prepping anyway. But if it does happen, then you might need to kind of chill for a little bit while things get resolved. Because, I don't know how quickly the demand and supply issues are going to spike prices. I don't know how quickly this situation could be resolved. I know that supposedly the White House is even working on it, whatever that means. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to approach this thing like it's going to happen. So don't get caught off guard by these events and keep an eye on them, because honestly, there's a lot of things happening in the world. And one thing we have to keep in mind, the 2020 crisis opened up a lot of people's eyes to quality of life and living conditions when it came to their employment, when it came to their treatment, and when it came to the amount of money they were actually earning and whether or not that was actually worth their time and effort. And I think that there's been kind of a reckoning when it comes to the workforce to say, I don't think this really makes sense anymore, right? And regardless of how you feel about it, that's just what's happening. So if that's what's happening, you and I have to be prepared for those shortages in the sense of labor to exist, which means we won't get access to things that we want. And that's just how life works. But seriously, we know how rampant inflation has become. We know how inflation has gone over the last 2 decades. And we also know that wages have literally not kept up with inflation. So not from any kind of a socialist standpoint or anything along those lines. Don't get it twisted, because I know the second people start talking about wages, they start throwing socialism out there as if that's like what everyone's goal is when it comes to that concept. But my, thought process regarding it is the fact that wages have not kept up with the cost of living. So that's the fault of the employers. And the way capitalism works is that as long as people are willing to work for those wages, that's the wages that are being paid. So it makes sense. But capitalism is going to have to adapt to the current environment in order to maintain the same level of production that they've experienced over the last couple of decades. Otherwise, people are just going to stop working because they literally can't afford to live anyway. So why waste their time at a job that's not making their ends meet? So that is now what's happening. This is just a reckoning in that sense. And I think a lot of companies will probably figure out ways to make accommodations occur. And I think that people will probably start getting paid more or something along those lines. But economics in general, profit margins still exist. So what does that mean? Well, here's the thing I would consider. And I think I actually Pinball mentioned this on one of his videos. So, and in case anybody here was wondering, I watch everybody. So you can like Pinball, you can dislike Pinball. Either way, I watch his videos just the same as I'll watch Canadian Preppers videos, just the same as I'll watch Bear Independence videos, just the same as I will watch somebody who no one knows about's videos, because I watch everything. I absorb the information that I find to be useful, and I get rid of anything I don't. And I think that's the best approach. I don't have to like everybody I watch, but I do watch everybody I want to. I guess that's what I wanted to say there. But either way, Pinball mentioned in one of his videos that he's expecting layoffs to happen at some point here in the near future because of the way things are going. And I think that will go hand in hand with that conversation. Okay, workers don't want to work because they're not getting paid enough because of inflation and the cost of living. Well, we have to raise their wages. The only way to stay profitable and raise these people's wages is to get less people. So what happens? You get automation, you streamline your process, you change your business environment and overhead, and then you keep the people you need and you pay them more, and then you get rid of everybody else. So the people who will have jobs will probably be doing better, and that's how capitalism will probably approach this situation. But there will be a lot of people that probably won't have jobs anymore. So it's a double-edged sword, unfortunately, and I think that's a very difficult thing. Yes, Durgan, I pressed all the buttons on purpose with that one because I wanted to do the full spectrum of YouTube prepper personalities to let everybody know that I just hang out with everyone, apparently. So, I'm not an amoeba, but I guess I'm willing to entertain. Does that make sense? But I do want to say that, yes, I think that's a good prediction, that I think people are going to lose their jobs and the people who maintain them will probably have better pay and better benefits and everything else. But other than that, yeah, I think that's the way capitalism has to go at this point. And thanks to the crisis of 2020, boom, remote work became very popular. And you know what remote work is great for? Not paying people much, because overhead doesn't exist and they can use quality of life as part of the benefit. Well, you don't get paid a lot, but you get to work from home. And really, why wouldn't you want to do that? And really, isn't that just worth making less, right? And honestly, a lot of us make that decision. I've made that decision, right? My wife was a stay-at-home mom while I worked because it was better for our family. We made less money overall because, she could have worked a job where we would have made more money. But for our children and for taking care of them and everything else, her staying home was a better benefit than her making more money. So these are sacrifices that we make as people. So of course businesses are going to look at that the same way. So that's just my thought process there. Angry Truth is here. Hello, good to see you. And Desert 1776, good to see you as well. Zombie Prepper, hello. And one thing's for sure. If you watch The Angry Prepper, The Angry Truth is the channel where you get a lot of the other information that's questionable in the sense of whether or not YouTube will allow it to exist. So I think there's some good info over there for sure. And it is interesting getting an inside perspective of New York City and how New York is operating, because, wow, they really love to declare emergencies for things that you wouldn't expect an emergency to be declared for. And then they let other ones go just because why not? So it is very interesting hearing all that inside information. So I appreciate that. Angry Truth. Thank you for that. Now, Mary Jane says, I get nothing done if I work from home. And I think that's a lot of people's assumption that haven't done it before. But the key to everything, even if you do work a job, but especially if you work at home, and especially if you work for yourself, is a schedule, a strict schedule and a routine. You just need to have a routine that allows you to maintain a certain level of productivity so that you don't find yourself wandering off and constantly looking in your refrigerator and closing the door again because you didn't see the same food 4 different times that you didn't want to eat. But that's definitely true. I think that it is difficult, but you definitely get used to it. It takes a little bit of willpower in a strange way, I guess is the best way to say that. Listen, I wanted to bring this up. Food is a priority, and it always is, but like literally, don't be fooled by the current comfortable situation at hand. Everybody's so comfortable so quickly. Look, we went from, and I'm talking about this from the sense of like as a community, okay? So as a community, we went from, we might be in World War III back in February, okay, to now in September being like, and that's what it feels like in many ways. Now, obviously, we can still see ourselves in World War III at any point in time, and a lot of people have claimed that it's already started. We just haven't really felt it yet, and that's understandable. But my concept surrounding that is that people's priorities and focus have drifted away from that, even though the threat probably grows every day that conflict maintains. The fact that it hasn't happened yet is what makes people feel like it's not really worth caring about any longer. So that's an issue, and that's something that we see a lot here, and I think food is going to be just the same way. Well, there's food in the store. I can still buy groceries. Yeah, it's more expensive, but I still have food, so I'm not too worried about these food shortages, especially if you're just talking about next year, man. I mean, that's a long ways away. It's not that far away, especially when next year comes around and you realize, man, I really should have done more when it came to food. And yeah, prepping food is great. Let me give you guys a couple of quick tips before we wrap this up. Okay, first off, fill your pantry first. Get that pantry up and running so that you have like a huge pantry that you rotate. Because in all honesty, long-term survival food is great to have on hand. It makes me feel good and I like it. But you really should just have a ton of food in your pantry to the point where you can just like live off that for an extended period of time. And in fact, you shouldn't have to touch your survival food during like a temporary crisis. Like let's say hurricane, blizzard, long-term power outage or whatever, like that long-term food like shouldn't even be touched still. If we're talking about like 2 weeks to a month, like you should almost have that kind of food just in your rotational pantry without having to access that stuff. But the other thing to keep in mind is when it comes to food, I would really focus on some type of production. And even if you can't have a garden, let's just say for an example, okay, you can't have a garden, you're in an apartment, I get it. I totally understand. Grow like one thing, okay? Grow like an herb plant. Grow something in your windowsill. Grow one plant that can produce something that you can literally stick in your mouth and consume. And that will not only make you feel good about, hey, I literally produced something that I can eat myself, but it will also teach you some responsibility when it comes to like growing that plant, when it comes to keeping it alive, when it comes to planting it and transferring it and everything else. Even if it's just one stinking plant, if you do that and then the world falls apart the next day, you can go out there and at least you know the bare minimum skill level of, I grew a plant to fruition to where I could eat it, so I know I can do that again. Okay. And I think that that's a good idea. I think that's not the worst thing to practice, even if it's just one stinking tiny windowsill plant. I think it's a good idea. And honestly, you'll feel very rewarded by eating something you grew. I mean, you just will. It'll feel good because you're like, wow. I mean, yeah, I spent maybe more money than I would have had to buy a pepper at the store. And yeah, I had to buy a flower pot, some soil, and all this crap. But it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, you got the experience of producing something that fed you yourself. And that's huge. I think that's awesome. So just my 2 cents when it comes to the food concept right now. Okay. Get that pantry up and running and have that filled up. Long-term storage food is good to have. But I mean, if you have a pantry that'll last you 6 months, you're doing really good compared to almost everyone else, no matter what anyway. And it doesn't really matter if you have food for 25 years, because here's the thing about an emergency. If the emergency lasts a year and I have food that lasts 25 years, but I only have 4 months of it, well, I'm still only going to eat for 4 months, right? So keep all of that in mind. A rotational pantry that will last you 6 months is better than long-term storage food that'll only last you 3 months, because at the end of the day, you'll still have that rotational pantry no matter how much long-term storage food you have. Just how I'm approaching the situation and how I would suggest everybody else approach it as well. It's just what we really need to start focusing on. So wanted to bring that to your attention. Look, am I going to talk more about food on this channel? Yeah. Am I going to talk about some of the crises going on in the world right now and some of the dangers that people are bringing to the table because of them? Of course I am. Am I going to talk about guns and ammo? Oh, yeah. And you know why? Because it's stuff that I like. And, you know, I know that preparedness has a lot of different facets to it, and I try my best to keep things well-rounded in the sense of not focusing too hard on one thing with every video I produce. But at the end of the day, we all kind of have our niche. And you know what? Mine's probably not bushcraft and snare traps. You know, it's just that's just not who I am. And I think those skills are good skills to have, but that's just not me. I mean, yeah, I think they're important skills, but I'm not the one to teach somebody else to do them. You know, I need to learn from somebody better than me. That's just where I'm at. But, you know, you want to, you know, play around with some weird equipment, I'm good with that. So just wanted to throw that out there, let you guys know, you know, what's going on over here on the channel. Risky Krisky, appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. We got ABC Patriot as well. Bitter Critter, hello. I appreciate that. Rachel Liu, let's see. We live in a rental. We have no fireplace. Trying to find a propane heater. Propane scares me, though. We have never used one. So just make sure when you're looking for one, some of the Mr. Buddy propane heaters are specifically rated for indoor use, which would be important in that situation. And they also have adapters so that you can use the single, like 1 pound propane cylinders, but you can also move up to 20 pound propane tanks too with the adapter. So that gives you options, and the 20 pound tanks store more easily and last longer in the sense of being able to run the heater. So those are all good considerations. I would still suggest making sure you can be in some kind of ventilated environment, because regardless of the safety of an indoor propane heater, I don't like to take those risks unnecessarily. So I think ventilation is still a decent idea. And I also think having a carbon monoxide detector is a really good idea when it comes to that. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that similarly to needing ventilation, I'll put this out here now for you guys to consider, thanks to Rachel Liu's question. But what I would also suggest is get a folding camping like wood stove. You don't have to buy a huge German wood stove that gets permanently installed in your living room and has this beautiful tile work that's done around it and everything else. You don't necessarily need that. Buy a folding wood stove. They have the piping and everything you need to ventilate it outside of your home or whatever it is you're going to use it in. And personally, I think that would make a good addition to keeping maybe an outside area of your home warm, like a garage or a shed or something like that if needed. Just make sure everything's done appropriately when it comes to the fire hazard, right? You want to make sure you have the right flashing. You want to make sure that your ventilation and everything is done appropriately to where you're not going to catch yourself on fire, right? But they're very inexpensive, and it gives you a secondary option for heat that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So you don't need to spend, $700 on a cast iron wood stove. You can buy one of the camping style ones, which are folding. They're small, they're lightweight, they're made for tents, but they're very inexpensive. And if you have a room like a garage or a shed or something, like that could be a really good option for you to maintain one small area with heat, while having that secondary fuel source that's not propane, that's not electric or anything like that. So just a suggestion for you in case you're looking for alternative options. All right. These are things that I think are worth looking into. Officer 47 likes the VP9. All I'll say, Jeremy Taylor likes HK too. All I'll say about HK is, like, I wish I had some. But I also am glad I don't, just because I don't know if I can afford everything else that goes with owning HKs. So that's just me. But I have nothing bad to say about them as a company. And if someone threw a USP in my hand right now, or a VP9, or honestly, you know what a Grail gun would be for me from HK, a Mark 23. Yeah. Do I like the idea of an assault handgun that's specifically made for offensive purposes? Yeah. So yeah, Mark 23 all day long. No worries. I really appreciate all of you here. I really do. And I thank you guys for being here on Monday nights. It really makes my day. And I think that we need to kind of wrap this up, but food, make it a priority. Do what you can. Bitter Critter ammo by me is expensive, but ammo on the internet's not so bad, although there are issues surrounding that now at this point in time now, aren't there? So keep that in mind. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but I like everything else about our conversation, and I want to make sure that all of you are as prepared as possible. So thank you guys so much. I will see you next Monday. That's going to be it for Magic Prepper.